Shalom, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Pulse of Israel. I am here today in studio with Gideon Israel. Shalom, Gideon.
Shalom. Good to be here.
It is a pleasure having you. Gideon, we're talking to him today. I am talking to him today about his new book. Here we go. It is called Broken Values: How the Democratic Party Platform Betrays Its Followers and America. And just to give you a little intro, Gideon is the president of the Jerusalem-Washington Center. His writings on American culture and foreign policy have appeared in the Daily Wire, American Thinker, and Front Page magazine. You can also see him weekly on Channel 20 and ILTV discussing American politics and U.S.-Israel relations. This is not his first book. Gideon's previous book is U.S. Foreign Aid to Israel, a Reassessment, published in 2013, and Gideon holds an MA in International Relations from Bar-Ilan University, married with 3 children. Gideon, you are quite accomplished.
Sounds like an impressive person.
Sounds very impressive. So here we are. You basically are, again, Broken Values: How the Democratic Party Platform Betrays Its Followers and America. And here we have the book. And where can people buy it?
You can get it on Amazon.
Amazon.com.
If you're in America. And if you're in Israel, we'll put a link on.
We will put the link for everyone to be able to purchase, because basically, I mean, I'm going to ask you about the book, but you basically, from what I understand, you break down the changes in the party platform of the Democratic Party over the elections, ever since President Bill Clinton.
Right.
And you basically show how the party's totally changed. What's going on? Why'd you write the book, Gideon?
So there's a few reasons, but one of them is that that a few years ago, after Prime Minister Netanyahu gave his famous speech in Congress, where he told Congress that they should reject the Iran deal, and it seemed that the Democrats were, infuriated by it, and a lot of people blamed the Prime Minister for causing the Democrats to distance themselves from Israel. I then felt that it was, it certainly wasn't about, Netanyahu's actions, but it was more about a values change in the party that had already caused the Democrats to start distancing themselves from Israel. And it took a while until I decided, how I'd write the book and what it exactly would be on. But the idea was I wanted to try to, I'd say, give an overview of what's happened, since Bill Clinton, since the Bill Clinton years until now. And the reason I chose the Bill Clinton years is I actually remember, as a young 10-year-old, we lived in New Jersey, and my mom knew I liked politics. She took me to the...
Wait a second. You were 10 when Bill Clinton started his presidency?
In 1992, yeah.
Oh, my God.
So
that just means how old I am.
Are you older?
I was already married when Bill Clinton became president. Holy cow! Go for it, yeah.
So we lived in New Jersey, and my mom, and the Bill Clinton headquarters was at the Hyatt Hotel. It was in New Brunswick, and that was where they were going to have what they would hope to be a victory party, at least for the New Jersey branch. And my mom took me there that night, and that was the time when. I remember my parents voted for Clinton, and looking back and looking where they are now, they wouldn't touch a Democrat, and I just wanted to show what had happened, in that 25, 30-year period.
So what happened?
Well, I mean, that's a loaded question.
That's the whole book, right? What happened is the whole book.
That's well, first of all, the Democratic Party was different before Bill Clinton came along. The Democrat Party had been in the wilderness in the 80s. They'd won to combine the 17 states throughout 3 elections. So out of 150 potential states, they won 17 states in 1980, 84, and 88. And the party was, in the wilderness. They realized that whatever they were putting forward was not what the American people were looking for. So in the beginning, in the middle 80s, they started to, think, how do they, rebrand themselves? How do they improve their image? So So that was why, and that was what happened with Bill Clinton, and that's why Bill Clinton has a very different platform than previous Democratic Party platforms that were in the 80s and prior to that. So that's why I started with Bill Clinton, but basically, I mean, in a nutshell, what's happened is the party went from a patriotic party. They were still left, but it was a patriotic party to a party now, especially in the 2020 platform, which is almost a party that has disdain for America, that sees America as fundamentally flawed, and also kind of rejecting the traditional American values that they espoused in the 90s and even in the beginning of the 21st century. So that's like the big picture.
Now again and again, I told you I didn't get to finish reading the book, but I started it and I am definitely going to finish it. And something very unique that Gideon does in the book is he goes one value at a time. Each chapter is about a different value. So can we go through some examples to show how you basically document the change in the Democratic Party? And it's interesting because it very much goes, a lot of people today say, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me. And your book actually documents that very well. Family values, for instance. You want to take that one and show how it changed from the Clinton years till today?
Yeah, sure. So the platforms in 1992, 96, and 2000 specifically were filled with the importance of strong families, the importance of families being the primary educators of their children, teaching them right from wrong, teaching them the importance of education, and sort of, even though the schools obviously played a role, but it was considered that the parents were the first educators, and strong families were considered like the fundamental or the foundation of a strong America. And then you have something interesting in 2008, where the platform says it's time we stop talking about family values and actually implement values that really appreciate families. And that sounds like, yeah, that's a strong statement. But then you say to yourself, well, wait a second. In the 90s, they also had these economic ideas that were supposed to value families, and the ideas that they were putting forward in 2008 and 2012 were pretty similar to what they put forward in the 90s, maybe some new things as time goes on. So then the question was, well, wait a second, if that's the case, why the swipe at the family? Like, what's so bad about talking about family values? It wasn't like talking about family values prevented actually implementing economic policies that, in the eyes of the Democrats, valued families. So that was kind of like a segue to sort of stop talking about family values and the importance of educating children, controlling the entertainment they watch, and so many things. And what I later talk about in the chapter is I give a few examples of how basically that the Democrats eventually emptied themselves of any values that would actually allow them to talk about family values. So, for example, and there's actually an article in the Atlantic in around 2013-14, which the title is "Why is it so difficult for liberals to talk about family values?" Which is, by the way, another important thing I do in the book. It's not, I don't come as, let's say, Gideon Israel or as a conservative or as a Republican saying, look how bad the Democrats are, and then bring National Review articles. No, I bring the left-wing media to show they were also talking about these changes and asking these questions.
Interesting.
So, but I'll give you an example. So in Colorado, you had a law, or in Oregon, you had a law that basically said that children who reach the age of 15 don't need parental consent if they want to have a sex change. So you can't get tattoos, you can't drink, you can't smoke at that age. But if you wanna get a sex change, puberty blocking drugs, you can do that without parental consent. And that's just one of many examples I give, that if that's your value, how can you teach parental authority? How can you, because or in Colorado, they passed laws that about a sex education, and that's also something in the book that I show, that in the Democratic Party platform, it's kind of the language is kind of like multidimensional. If you glaze over it, sometimes you say like, yeah, that sounds good. But like, if you really understand what they're talking about, you say, no, I don't want that. So for example, sex education it was a law that the Democratic controlled legislature in Colorado passed, which one of the things was that if you are going to teach sex education, you have to teach all outcomes of pregnancy equal, meaning abortion, adoption, parenting, or leaving the baby at the fire station within 72 hours of birth.
Okay.
So, for example, that's a demo. Now, of course, there was a big uproar, from, I guess, conservatives or maybe normal people in Colorado. And eventually the bill was watered down. But nonetheless, that was one of the final things in the bill. And I said, well, if that's what you're teaching, then that these are that any outcome of pregnancy is fine, whether it be leave the baby at the fire station, abortion, then how can you teach like responsibility? Right. How can you teach the value of having children? So it's kind of like, if these are your values, it's just not relevant to talk about family values. It's just not there. So
right.
It's not part of your belief system. So that's an example of, so eventually, in the 2016 and 2020, even part of the 2012 platform, there's nothing about family values. Also, I mean, another thing, and, people might think this is controversial, but this is their words. If in the 90s, they talked about the importance of fathers, very important.
Again, you're referring to the Democratic Party platform in the
90s. And even actually throughout the Obama years, they talked about the importance of fathers. Fathers need to be there. But if you accept the premise, as the Democrat platform does eventually, that of gay marriage, of marriage, homosexual marriage, that marriage can be between two women, then how can you talk about the importance of fathers? I mean, it just doesn't. If marriage can be one and one, if it can be anything, then you just can't talk about that anymore. So it kind of just became a contradiction.
So does that still remain in the party platform, the importance of fathers?
No. The importance of the importance of fathers, the last time it was in 2012, but it's interesting because Obama, who his father abandoned him at a very early age. So, and even in his book about dreams from my father or whatever, so his father is kind of like that's something that really I don't know what the word is, bothered him, but it's kind of like it was close to him. That issue was close to him. That
he's also on the record. I mean, he's quoted all the time. And I think there's actually video footage of it, of him saying that one of the major problems in the Black American community is the father is absent. And I think the percentage back, even when he said this, was over 70% of Black American families.
Right.
But yet he is a major supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement. And part of the platform of the Black Lives Matter movement is the not importance of father in the home. It's the breakdown of the family structure. Mm-hmm. But that's going in a totally different direction. I also want to touch upon you specifically Israel and the change of Israel in terms of the values of the Democratic Party platform. So what do you have to say about that?
So Israel's an interesting subject, because I think rarely do you have specific things that remained in the platform almost unchanged for like 30, 40 years. Usually if an issue has a run for like 20 years, it's a pretty good run. But Israel. So for example, Israel from the 70s and from maybe 76, you had the idea that Israel was a strategic partner, and there was a special relationship, and it was and Israel was an ally. Like the words ally, special relationship. Sometimes I think both appear, sometimes one appeared, but those always appeared. And then in 2012, that's missing. Now, to the person who reads the 2012 platform, the language is still, we have an unbreakable, bond with Israel or whatever. So someone says, oh, okay, unbreakable bond. That sounds good. I like unbreakable bond. But why why did suddenly, after 30, some odd years of having this language, special relationship and ally, why is it suddenly missing? Why is it suddenly missing? And it's not like, it's not like people are, just writing the platform. These are things, every word is poured over. It's the Torah shebichtav. This is not every, and these things are carefully written to.
It's the written Bible, right?
to appeal to as many constituencies as possible. So that was one example. Also, of course, in that, and of course, what happened? The Obama presidency happened because the platform is sort of lagging behind the past 4 years. So, in 2012, after 4 years, of Obama, who, even according to Michael Oren, there was a tectonic, quote, tectonic shift in the relationship. So suddenly it makes sense, why that happened. It was Obama. And then you have also the famous Jerusalem not being in the 2000s. The famous scene where you have the mayor of Los Angeles, who's the Democratic Convention chairman.
This is 2012 Democratic Convention,
right? And God and Jerusalem had been
left out
from
the party platform.
And then he, gets up there, and that's what I talk about in the beginning of the book. And he gets up there, and I guess they thought it was just going to be a simple vote. All right, we'll put it back in. Some people say Obama did it purposely. Some people say he didn't. Who knows? But the point is, this guy Villaraigosa gets up there, and it was already on the teleprompter that this has to pass. So he was confused when he says, okay, let's hear the ayes and the nays, and you needed like two-thirds of the ayes to get it in, and it was clear that it was equal, if not more nays. And finally, after like 3 voice votes, he just rams it through. And then Jerusalem, it's of course booed that they put Jerusalem and God.
So it was, again, just to clarify, it was not part of the platform. And then there was a vote to add Jerusalem and God to the platform. And they had 3 votes because they didn't get enough yays.
Right.
And even though they still didn't get enough yays, they still pushed it through. So on the one hand, you could say, well, thank God.
Sorry, let me add. Jerusalem, as being the capital of Israel, had been in the platform since 1972. So that was another major change.
So basically, what that 2012 Democratic National Convention showed was the change in the Democratic Party, that there was a conscious effort to take Jerusalem as Israel's capital out of the platform, as well as God out of the platform. But there was enough pressure that to have it remain as part of the platform,
right? And that's kind of also what's going on, especially on the Israel issue, is that it's not like there wasn't ever like an anti-Israel base in the Democratic Party. There was, people remember in the 80s there was Jesse Jackson, and he had almost 30% support. But the difference was in the 1980s, the Jewish groups, AIPAC was very well organized, and that's why. James Zogby says, the head of the Arab American Institute, who's been advocating for Palestinian rights since the 80s.
True.
And he says that he was told in 1988 at the convention that the P word, and he says, and it wasn't poop, it was the P word, the Palestinians, would not be mentioned in the platform so as not to alienate the Jewish vote. But now we almost have the opposite, and from not being mentioned in the 1980s, the Palestinians, now, especially in the 2020 platform, the Palestinians have been put on equal footing with the Israelis, meaning the Palestinians' right to a state, meaning once upon a time, the idea of a Palestinian state, when the Democrats advocated for it, was like, that's in Israel's security interests in 2012, or even in 2016, that'll be the outcome of negotiations. Now it's Israel's right to a state, and the Palestinians.
As a U.S. interest, it's no longer just an issue of Israel and their platform. It's a U.S. interest,
or it's what they support. Meaning to say that as long as if in the past we could say, okay, why isn't there a Palestinian state? Because they haven't been cooperative or they haven't been acting normally. Now it would be something like, well, it doesn't matter how the Palestinians are acting; they have a right to a state.
Right.
Right. So that was a huge change.
So everyone, again, this is very interesting, sitting here with Gideon Israel, the author of Broken Values. how, I have to read it again, how the Democratic Party platform betrays its followers and America. All right. And basically this book, what Gideon does, each chapter he deals with a value that the Democratic Party deals with in a historic way, an historic perspective, starting with the party platform of the Bill Clinton years. And he goes through fading American values, the religion values, family unit values, racism, abortion, immigration, Second Amendment, criminal justice, Israel, and then showing how the Democratic Party has changed by looking at the language of the changing party platforms. Now, we're before an election, 2020 election, November 3rd is coming up, and obviously plenty of people are thinking about who to vote for, or they're extremely dogmatic about who to vote for. And people will say, Gideon, very nice. I mean, yeah, it's very nice that you show us that the party platform has changed and values that essentially I believed in 20 years ago that the Democratic Party stood for, today they don't stand for. But times change. And as times change, values change. So while you're saying that it's betraying American voters and American values and America, but America's different today. So I'm not bothered by that. I'm voting for Biden and the Democratic list. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, if you don't, these values that the Democrats mentioned, first of all, I mean, if that's how you feel, so go ahead. But
no, but it's okay. Look, it's someone who believes in these values. They believe in the importance of family. They're Israel supporters. They believe in strong criminal justice, etc. Like they believe in those values. But all right, but America's now a woke country, and I have to give in because I'm more afraid of the Republicans and Trump destroying the country.
Well, I think that these values that the Democrats mentioned, they weren't only values in the 1990s. They've been the values. Faith has been part of America since its founding. The idea of personal responsibility, the idea of you can work hard, and if you work hard, with grit, you can make it. Of course, that's why immigrants come to America from all over the world with nothing. Why don't they come to other countries? Why do they go to America? Because that's the place where there's a belief, that you take responsibility for yourself. You can make it. And the same. These are all values that have been part of America for 200 years. While times have changed, but it's not, these are values that are, you'd almost say are important to any society that wants to thrive. If there's no such thing as personal responsibility, if, as we see in the Democratic platform in 2020, if everybody's a victim, if everybody believes they're a victim, what kind of society are you creating? If you don't think strong families are very important. I mean, families are our first introduction into the world before we know anything. If you don't think that those and if you don't think strong families are important, and we can see where the family is broken, we see how much crime there is and how many issues. So these are, whether the Democrats, whether times are changing or not, these are values that are needed in any society that wants to thrive. But I think, listen, I think one of the things to look at, some people like, Joe Biden, they think he's a decent person, at least that's what they get from his demeanor. People have stories, the Shiva story, the woman who gave, $20 to his campaign.
I didn't hear those stories yet.
There's one person who tells the story about how there was some woman who gave like $18 to his campaign since he started running for senator in 1972 or 74. And when I think when maybe she passed away, her husband passed away, and there was like a minion and out in the laundry room, suddenly, he stopped by, so I think the most worrisome thing is that the people that will be running this administration, it will not be Joe Biden. It will not be Joe Biden. It will be the people around him who are not. I mean, if you're an Israel supporter, I even think if you're an American supporter, these are not people who these are not people who think, America is, a great country. Yeah, it needs to be improved. I think these are people who think that, America is fundamentally flawed. And I mean, if that's the way you feel, then you want these people there. But I think for most Jews, we all think that, sure, America has what to improve. Even Jews remember from their own experience and the difficulties they faced, sometimes the anti-Semitism, sometimes, getting, those who wouldn't work on Shabbos getting fired from their job. But we all think that America is a great country and has provided a golden age for the Jews, at least for, 30, 40, 50 years. So I think the most worrisome part is that the people who would be running the administration are not necessarily those people. Are
you saying there is a disconnect between Joe Biden, the persona, and what he historically stands for as a U.S. Democratic politician, and the Democratic Party platform as it's actually written?
I think that some of the positions, I think he's changed. I mean, he's also changed over the years, but if you just, for example, take the Israel issue, and there are many issues, but the Israel issue where Joe Biden, might be more of the classic Democrat, 90s Democrat, 15 years ago Democrat in support of Israel. I don't think he's going to be the one exactly controlling all, Israel policy. They're going to be people, behind the scenes who will be, digging into Israel. And yes, so he won't be the one controlling all of it. And I think, that's just one example.
Worrisome. Right. So I want to bring up the back cover. I want to ask you about this. So here you have giving context for the book, Broken Values. And I'm quoting now from the back cover of the book. America was built on stolen lands. Jim Crow segregation lives on. Remnants of slavery persist. Systematic racism is everywhere. Women are oppressed. Abortions are to be celebrated. Religion is divisive. Please don't mention God. Illegal immigrants come before citizens. Police are bad. You are a victim. The Second Amendment is on the way out. There is inequality all around. Dump the Constitution. It's time for a new social contract. And then you write, is this really America 2020?
Is this really America?
Is this really America 2020? Yes, that's how the Democrats see it. It's written in their platform. Are those things really written in the Democratic Party platform?
Yeah. In the 2020 platform, yeah.
Holy cow.
I mean, they're not, by the way, before 2020, you never had Jim Crow in the platform. That was never, even, at the heights of, the civil rights movement, you never had that. The idea of seeing America, as fundamentally flawed, not from the Civil War, but already 400 years ago, that you have in the platform, and systemic racism, which made its debut in the 2016 platform, has now permeates the 2020 platform. Women are in general considered oppressed by the Democratic Party. Abortions, which were once upon a time, Bill Clinton had the phrase, more legal and rare, less necessary and more rare. There was at least an aspiration, let's try to reduce abortions. But now abortions are celebrated. The language is like to celebrate the right, and we see that, with the Empire State Building being pink,
I didn't see that.
That Cuomo lit up, when there was some, I think, legislation passed in New York. Religion is considered divisive, meaning once upon a time, the way religion was portrayed was that it was, either part of the values of America or, just take this, for example. Bill Clinton, he signed a certain piece of major legislation in 1993. And in his speech on the lawn of the White House, he said, there's a major debate, in our nation and, about the role of religion in politics. And at the end, he says, I want to come down on the side that says, yes, bring your convictions into politics. Bring those religious, what you believe to be right. Can you imagine that today? Today, religion, the way it's portrayed in the platform, is that religion is something that that discriminates. Please don't mention God. God is like it's mentioned like once as, you know, in the past few platforms as God-given, like God-given, like, you know, a little, like, you know, give it to them just so there won't be a whole big, you know, brouhaha with the Republicans. But in 2019, you had some of the Democrat committee chairs trying to take out, you know, "So help you God" from when witnesses are sworn in Congress, and you actually had a Jerry Nadler who, you know, took it out. He was one of the committee chairs, and you had Mike Johnson who says, Mr. Chair, I think we spoke about this on the floor, and he's like, well, do you want me to do it again? Like, should I do this swearing again with, you know, God? And he's like, yeah, you know, I'd appreciate that. So he does it.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, even at the Democratic Party convention just a few weeks ago, there were a number of the caucuses that when they took what's it called?
The Pledge of Allegiance.
When they took the Pledge of Allegiance, forgive me, they took out God. They took out God.
Right. There's someone who, you're right.
There were a few of them.
Right. And then, you know, illegal immigrants come before citizens. Yeah, like the idea of, you know, giving, you know, all the rights that citizens have to illegal immigrants, you know, who aren't even, you know, citizens. And that's not to say that you should be, you know, against immigrants, but, you know, people who are citizens, who have been there, who've been paying, you know, taxes and are part of the country. Yes, they should come before people who are there illegally. Police are bad. Oh yeah, Democrats once were, you know, they called police, you know, courageous, and let's give them all the tools they need. Now, you know, the only praise for policemen is if they're not, you know, beating the hell out of you know, someone they arrest. That's the only praise they get. Victimhood is all around. The Second Amendment, for the first time in 50 years, the idea of having a right, you know, to have a weapon is not mentioned in the platform.
At a time period where more Americans are buying guns than ever before because of the feeling of insecurity across America, thanks to Antifa and Black Lives Matter protests.
And just the last thing is they do talk about having a new social contract. They do. You know, they do talk about the idea of that we're gonna create a new social contract. Now they're not necessarily saying, you know, dump the Constitution, but that's the underlying, like, you know,
wow.
theme.
All right, so again, sitting here with Gideon Israel, author of Broken Values: How the Democratic Party Platform Betrays Its Followers in America. Why should people be purchasing this book, especially before the upcoming 2020 elections, Gideon?
Well, I would say to whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I think this is a book that you should want to read, just to educate yourself, you know, about what's been going on in the past 30 years and how the parties change. If you're if you're a Republican or, you know, conservative, you might be astonished and you'd be like, wow, how did that happen? And if you're if you're a Democrat, you might want to say, wait a second, is this really where we want to go? You know, is this really where we want to go? And, because one of the things I read in the last chapter is that they talk about healing the soul of a nation.
Mm-hmm.
How can you talk about healing the soul of the nation when you talk about the nation essentially as oppressor and oppressed? And not only that, after, you know,
good point.
You could also air all the dirty laundry. You could say, you know, we have this problem, we have that problem, you know, and families do that. But at the end of the day, you have something to unite yourself. The Democrats have no value to unite. After they've said, yes, we have all these problems, there's nothing to unite. And they do say, well, the Americans are a generous, compassionate people. And then you say to yourself, oh, really? You mean that country, that people that's been oppressing, you know, everybody else, but that's the generous people you're talking about? So it's almost like
sounds like that's a leftover, still part of the platform that one of these days will be taken out as well.
Yeah, so it just seems disingenuous. So I think it's and therefore, you know, whether you agree with it or not, you are going to get the facts. You're actually going to get this is not, you know, gossip. This is not, you know, tell all. This is, you know, it's research, and I would say, you know, most of it you could do reverse engineering and you'll get to many of the same conclusions. And I say in the book, I don't offer my opinion in many places.
Mm-hmm.
I don't offer.
You're just documenting the actual change.
I'm documenting. I documented the change in the platform. I try to give background, what was going on at the time
mm-hmm.
that caused it to change. And I also bring the left-wing media outlets who discuss these changes. So, you know, so I think, you know, whether you agree with it or not, or not, you'll come out with knowledge.
Again, based on your research and your insight on the changes to the party platform from Bill Clinton until today, the 2020 elections, any insight into this upcoming elections?
Meaning what the outcome will be?
Yeah, based on your understanding of the changes to the Democratic Party in the actual platform, and where Americans and Americans with American values stand today, moving into the elections.
Well, I mean, one of the things you see is that it used to be that I think that in the Republican and the Democrat Party, especially in the 90s, it was kind of like even. Basically, people who had, no high school, only a high school degree, some college degree or postgraduate. But one of the things that you see is that now is that there's, there's many more people with either college or postgraduate degrees in the Democratic Party, as opposed to the Republican Party, where there's more, I guess, people with high school education. You see millennials favor the Democratic Party, much more than the Republican Party, which kind of could indicate that if all the millennials might come out to vote, then those young people under 35, that could maybe spell trouble for the Republicans, especially if they go Democrat. But I think this election will be very unique because we have the mail-in ballots. And what I remember from the 2018 elections, the congressional elections, was I remember two things. One, you had a race in New Mexico where the Republican went to bed at 2 in the morning and she was ahead by 2,800 votes. And then suddenly, miraculously, 8,000 votes appear sometime in the morning. And of those this Republican ends up losing by 1,800 votes. Now I did the math, which means that of those 8,000 votes, something like 6,200 were for the Democrat and 1,800 were for the Republican. And in Orange County in in California, where it's mostly Republican congressmen, most of them went to bed on election night with a commanding lead, the congressional, the congressman. And little by little, every day, more and more votes, came in, and suddenly all of them lost. Even people had like a 7% lead on election night. So, some people might say, well, that was just how the voting worked. Other people, raise an eyebrow and say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. How is it that there's never been, one of those mail-in votes that goes in the direction of the Republican? So it's kind of worrisome. It's kind of worrisome, this whole mail-in. And people say, a lot of times you see the anchor saying, well, what's your proof? What's your proof? And it's not proof. It's kind of like logic. If these, millions of votes are being sent out to all the people in the voter rolls, some are dead, some are, not living in that state anymore, and some are being, thrown on the side of the road. It's logic that there's.
Listen, and even without proof, I mean, the elections haven't happened yet. It is extremely worrisome when we already have some information out there. And I think there are 3 pieces of information, or 2, that I'm going to raise. One, there was a data firm associated with the Democratic Party, and forgive me for not remembering which one, but they had a war room symposium to play out the elections.
Right.
And John Podesta was Joe Biden. And this was publicized.
Right, in the Boston Globe.
And that John Podesta as Joe Biden, right, with the results coming in of President Trump winning the election, he would not concede the elections, right? So he's saying Joe Biden is not going to concede the elections. And then you have Hillary Clinton being interviewed. Again, video footage. I don't remember who she was being interviewed by at the moment. And she also called out to Joe Biden, do not concede the elections. And then the third data point that I want to bring up, I don't know, this is just from a few days ago, Mark Zuckerberg was interviewed. Oh, not interviewed. He made a video that was publicized about the elections, saying it is not illegal to wait a few days or even a few weeks for the final results of the elections. Facebook will be taking down, if I'm not mistaken, you use those words or a connotation of taking down, any posts post-election of people saying that Donald Trump won. Meaning actually taking down posts that say that Donald Trump won the elections. So you put these three different data points together, and already there is a public consensus that they're trying to build that post-election evening, even with the exit polls, even if Donald Trump landslide victory, it seems like the Democratic Party and Joe Biden are not going to concede. And all of the social media companies are basically going to not allow any posts or articles to be allowed to be posted. And it's all about waiting until however long it takes for all those mail-in ballots to come in to then say the winner. And it's very worrying. On the one hand, you could talk about mail-in ballots being a potential problem. That on its own is a problem. But here you have people associated or ideologically supportive of the Democratic Biden camp already setting up the reality that Biden is not going to concede no matter what the election results. So that sounds like it's going to be very worrying and potentially dangerous post-election 2020.
Yeah, and I would add to your point that even before they started talking about Joe Biden not conceding the election, they've been pumping for 2 years that Donald Trump is not going to leave the White House even if he loses. So they've already been sort of framing Donald Trump as someone who's a danger to American democracy, and then put that with if Trump does contest the election and say, hey, wait a second, something's wrong here, then they'll say, see, this is exactly what we've been telling you for 2 years, that Donald Trump won't leave the White House. But listen, there's a case for optimism. Trump was the one. They asked Trump in the debates in 2016. They said, "So will you accept the results?" And he said, "We'll see." And Clinton said, "Oh, how horrible it is." And you saw, in the end of the day, it was just the opposite.
Right.
And she's still been contesting the results.
Right. Well, Gideon, a pleasure speaking to you about your book. Thank you very much for adding this. And again, for those of you who have just come in, Broken Values by Gideon Israel, and how the Democratic Party platform betrays its followers and America. And again, Gideon, he's not giving his own opinion. He breaks down researching the changes into the Democratic Party platform over the election years since Bill Clinton. And I'm going to post a link to be able to purchase it on Amazon.com.
And I would just add that, it reads like a story. So, I did my best to, when I finished writing the first draft of the book, I was kind of like, this is data and it's not interesting. This might be something that, people from think tanks, will read. But I think people who will read it will say, they'll enjoy the stories and they'll enjoy how the data sort of is inserted, into that.
Any final question, because it just came to my mind. Any chance of seeing a boomerang effect to the Democratic Party going back to its traditional family values that it used to be back in the Bill Clinton days?
Probably the only way that would happen is if they, get clobbered in this election and maybe the next election, and then they'll say, then they might have to say, wait a second, if we're not,
the woke party isn't winning it for us.
It might not necessarily be, going back to Bill Clinton, but it'll be going back to, something, more, traditionally American. I mean, remember, it's gone so far that even people on the left say this is not even Barack Obama's party.
Right.
And if that's if to say, already saying it's not Barack Obama's party is already, raises an eyebrow.
Right. No, that's true. That's very true. Well, listen, Gideon, thank you so much.
Thank you
for the book. Thank you for your time. Thank you for explaining this to us. Everybody, go purchase Broken Values: How the Democratic Party Platform Betrays Its Followers and America. Very important book to read, especially before the upcoming 2020 election. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to all of you, thank you for watching another episode of The Pulse of Israel. It is wonderful having you, signing off from the eternal and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. Shalom, everyone. Take care.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.